Chapter 19, Dinner Table Disaster. Since the Lord's Day was Emma's day off, most Sundays right after the service we would eat with the church family. Today I hoped we'd get an invitation so Daddy would forget about me and Jessalyn sloshing in the mud. When the last hymn ended and we hung our choir robes in the closet, Mrs. Simpson started toward us. I wanted to run as fast as I could from her and that rotten egg smile. I'd rather listen to Daddy fussing at me all afternoon than sit one single minute with Mrs. Simpson. Beautiful service this morning, Brother Joe. I thought our choirs sang awfully pretty, didn't you, girls? She adjusted the hat and the veil that mostly covered up her green-tinted hair. She smiled at our Daddy. Would you like to come over for noon dinner, unless someone else has spoken for you? The next thing I knew, Lordy help us, Jessalyn and me were in Mrs. Simpson's dining room, sitting in straight-back chairs, pushing pot roast around on fancy china plates. This was not the kind of house where anybody leaves the newspaper scattered on the floor or an iced tea glass sweating on the sideboard. Mrs. Simpson looked down from the head of her big table like not just the queen of the community pool directing her swimming esters, but the queen of hanging moss running our town. Brother Joe, she said, did Gloriana tell you that she paid us a visit down at the paper? Just a sliver of sunlight came through Mrs. Simpson's heavy curtains, and the giant chandelier over the table was turned down low, as if keeping it dark inside would make it cooler. I was sweating. Daddy's eyebrow went up. He put his heavy silver fork down a little too hard on the white tablecloth. He looked right at me. Is that right? He asked. She brought her very own letter to the newspaper editor, didn't you, dearie? Mrs. Simpson took a bite of her mashed potatoes and then started cutting her roast beef. She was smiling at me as if writing to the Hanging Moss Tribune might be just fine and dandy. I held on to my water goblet so tight I worried it might break. Daddy wrinkled his forehead up. He does that sometimes when he's thinking hard what to say. But Jessalyn spoke up first. You wrote a letter to the newspaper, Glory? She asked. You didn't tell me that. I took a sip of iced tea, hoping that would settle my belly flops down. I wrote to say that I didn't think it was right to close our pool. Emma was the only one who helped me, and mostly what she did was make sure that some of the words were spelled right, when I asked her to. I put my hand up to my mouth. Oh no. I hoped I hadn't gotten Emma into trouble. I looked up at Daddy. Do you think maybe it worked? Jessalyn and I saw a sign there today saying that the pool is opening to everybody. He turned to Mrs. Simpson. I've tried to teach my girls to speak up when they see a wrong being done. But I didn't read Glory's letter in the paper this week, he said. That's good news about the pool. Mrs. Simpson finished chewing with her mouth completely closed, like Emma always tells us that is polite, and then she touched her napkin to the corner of her lip and cleared her throat. Perhaps the editor didn't find Glory's letter appropriate for our readers, she said. And I don't know what you mean about the pool opening. Of course, my Esters and I hate to see it closed. She patted her greenish hair and smiled. But repairs are needed. That's that. My group will be swimming at a friend's pool. Not quite as large as our community pool, but it will have to do. Mrs. Simpson looked down at the table at Jessalyn and me. I'm sure you girls can find another place to swim. Can't they, Brother Joe? Our Daddy taught us to respect our elders. I wasn't supposed to talk back to members of the First Fellowship in particular, but I couldn't help myself. No, we can't find another place to swim. We want our pool to stay open. Did you even take my letter out of that drawer where you hid it? Did you show it to the editor, I asked. I looked from Mrs. Simpson to Daddy and then to Jesselyn. Somebody must have seen it. Maybe the editor gave it to the mayor. Why else then would they put that new sign up at the pool? Jesselyn sat up straight at the table. If it's really opening like the sign says, I'll bet it was Glory's letter. Jesselyn was actually sticking up for me. What exactly was in that letter? Why, I just might have a copy right here. Mrs. Simpson pushed away from the table. She walked to the sideboard, like a cupboard, and opened a drawer. Glory, would you like to share it, since the only person that seems to have seen this is your maid? She narrowed her eyes and looked from me to Daddy. She handed me the letter like it was written with a poison pen. I took a sip of the iced tea and I almost choked swallowing it. It felt like I was smothering to death in Mrs. Simpson's dining room. I glanced down at the white paper covered with my best script writing. Oh no, I shouldn't have said all that. What if my daddy gets in big trouble? By now my stomach was flopping so hard I could hardly hold the letter up. But I unfolded it and I began to read. June 26, 1964. Dear Editor, I love our community pool. My birthday party has been there every single summer since forever. But my forever is over now. My forever has been shut down with no plans of opening. Some stupid town council committee locked the gates up tight. They claim they're working to make the pool better, fixing cracks and broken fences. I don't believe that for a minute. They can lie all the livelong day, but they can't lock up the hot as fire rage burning inside of me. They can hammer their pool closed signs, but they better not expect me to stay closed. Does anybody think just because I'm not a grown-up that I can't see everything as clear as day? The people in this town dumb enough to agree to shut the pool down to keep the Negroes out and lying about it by saying it's the pool that needs fixing, they are the fools who can't see. I hadn't lifted my eyes from the paper once. I was afraid to look at my daddy's disappointed face. My hands were shaking, but I willed myself to keep reading. What's really broken and needs fixing, most of all, are the backward people running this town and the others who won't do a thing about it. You know what? Maybe I'm the fool and blind, or should I say I was a fool who used to be blind. I was dumb enough to fall for the ugly lies. I was blind to hatred that stings more than a bucket full of the pool's strongest chlorine. But I guess that I, Gloriana June Hempel, can swim underwater with my eyes open. I can look through the cloudiest, strongest chlorine, and I don't blink. Even underwater, I can see what's going on in Hanging Moss. You ignorant people who act like you own our town aren't fooling me one bit. I took a deep breath to slow down my heart and let the words sit for a while over the silent table. Nobody talked. Even Mrs. Simpson's clock seemed to stop its ticking. I finished reading. Every summer there's bothersome mosquito bites that set me to scratching all night, sweat that makes my shirt stick to my skin, heat that makes me nauseous, But the worst is when I step into a pile of what some mangy dog left behind, and the mess gets up over my shoes and stinks to high heaven. That's what closing the pool feels like to me. Hateful prejudice and dog do are a lot alike. They both make me sick. Signed, Gloriana June Hempel, age 11. My throat was burning dry when I was done reading. My knuckles were as white as the paper I was clutching. I couldn't hardly believe that I had written that. My daddy would skin me alive, but I meant every word. Jessalyn's mouth was open wider than Mrs. Simpson's gleaming round dinner plates. Daddy had his head down, shaking it slowly back and forth. Mrs. Simpson looked like she had stepped in dog do herself. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of that hot dining room. I choked back angry tears, but Daddy reached over and grabbed my hand. He squeezed it hard. Even though I was the one crying, something in Daddy looked so sad. I was watching your mother coming through you, he said quietly. She was like that, opinionated, strong in her convictions, too outspoken to be a good preacher's wife. He laughed just a little bit. You and Jessalyn remind me of more and more of her every day. Your mother would have been right pleased to hear you just now. I'm proud of you, Glory. I wiped the tears off of my face, but I didn't think I could answer just yet. I took a swallow of air, and I told myself to breathe. Then Jessalyn smiled down the table at me, and Daddy beamed at both of us, and I felt light enough to float off my chair and out of that hot, stuffy room. Till Mrs. Simpson's hateful voice brought me right back to the dining room table where she announced, "Whatever happened to Gloriana's original letter after I shared it with the editor is not my business." "Well, maybe you should make it your business, Mrs. Simpson," Daddy said. "You're on the town council. You should have spoken up, you know, about opening the pool to everyone. Many of our citizens prefer to see it closed rather than what might happen if we allow people with germs, some who don't bathe regularly, to swim with us." She stuck her nose up in the air like she was smelling something bad. "I speak for the town, and I don't know a thing about the community pool opening for the remainder of this summer, or ever again for that matter. You don't speak for all the town." Daddy's voice got louder. He folded his napkin and he started to push his chair back. "You don't speak for me." Jessalyn and I looked across the table at each other. That was our Daddy and his choir director. Our Daddy, who, while we were eating our Sunday afternoon meal with church people, didn't talk usually about anything more than spring rains coming or the new driveway going in at the bank. Here he was standing up to Mrs. Simpson over the pool closing. Miss Bloom was right. Maybe one letter, my letter, could make a difference. Mrs. Simpson picked up her fork and jabbed at her roast beef, and then she clanked down the fork so loud I jumped. "The pool needs repairs. There is no two ways about that. It will stay closed." "No, ma'am." I stuck that ma'am in there to be polite, like Emma taught me. "We saw the sign, didn't we, Jessalyn?" For a quick moment, a worried look crossed my sister's face. "We saw a sign," she said, frowning. "It seemed real." "A sign saying the pool's opening by July 4th, my birthday. Frankie showed us," I said, "and his daddy's on some committee too." Jessalyn said, "Somebody important must have read what you wrote, Glory. I'll bet it'll be in the paper next week. She looked right at Mrs. Simpson. Daddy taught me a lot. He says the newspaper is one good way to learn what is happening in the world. But Mrs. Simpson had crossed her knife and fork on her plate, decorated with gold leaves and pink roses. She folded her napkin by her iced tea glass. The pool is closed, she said again. She rang a little bell for the maid to come and take our plates. And even though I smelled something sweet as chocolate cake coming from the inside of the kitchen, it didn't seem like dessert was on the menu today. I don't believe you, I said, just waiting for my daddy to hush me up. But he didn't. Across the table, Jessalyn looked real happy to be my big sister. My letter, that's why we'll be swimming at the community pool on the 4th of July, I said. You're right, Jessalyn. Somebody important read my letter.